Hello and welcome to Realize Live 2024. My name is Devin Croswell and I am an NX trainer and senior design engineer with Sherpa Design. In this presentation, I'll be covering some of the most important aspects of NX CAD and how to teach them to others wanting to learn NX. Sherpa Design is based out of Portland, Oregon, and since 2001, Sherpa has been providing design and engineering services to companies nationwide. We are a company of more than 40 employees, and over the years have worked with more than 300 different clients in a wide range of industries. We at Sherpa believe in complete turnkey solutions for design and engineering, where we can quickly and easily collaborate between various disciplines in areas of design, engineering, product development, and even manufacturing. Our capabilities include mechanical and electrical engineering, industrial design, as well as a precision machine shop for prototyping and short-run production needs. We use carbon 3D machines and have production-level quality 3D printing capabilities. We also have 3 Team Center architects that offer a wide range of Team Center services. And of course, we provide all kinds of NX training, whether it be CAD training, CAM training, or training for Team Center integration. This can be in person, on-site, or given remotely while still being instructor-led, as well as being a downloadable web-based training that you can take at your own self-pace at nxtraining.com. nxtraining.com is our link to a selection of videos and accompanying documents and activity files for learning all that there is in the world of NX. We're constantly adding content and currently have a full NX CAD foundation course available for purchase, as well as specialty one-day courses such as advanced surfacing and sketching, among many others. In the agenda for this presentation, I'll be briefly going over the following topics from the perspective of an NX trainer and NX user. I want to make sure I'm providing those I'm working with and teaching the best and most useful content possible. Essentially, I'm asking myself some important questions. Why is training important? How can I be prepared to provide this training? What are some ways, or some of the ways, this content can be delivered to the customer? When I am training, how can I make sure that I'm coming across confident, allowing for a good flow within the course? How do I speak NX CAD? There are going to be a lot of people who are unfamiliar with the way NX does things, and I want to make sure that I am properly conveying whatever it is NX is trying to do and say within the program. How do I design good activities? I want the hands-on portion of the training to allow for the most efficient learning possibilities. So why is training important? This can mean different things to the individual being trained compared to the company that wants to or is giving the training. For the individual, we're usually seeking to improve ourselves in some measurable way, in this case adding NX CAD skills to the engineering or design knowledge we already carry. We want to make ourselves more valuable to our specific industry. For the company, it's a way to gain and retain top talent. It also increases job satisfaction, overall morale, and I'm sure the company is hoping productivity. With NX CAD training, we're to acquire specific skills, allowing for the creation of complex designs and assemblies, and hopefully increasing our knowledge and capabilities in overall engineering and design along the way. How am I making sure I'm always prepared to give the kind of NX training that may be needed? First and foremost, I'm always learning. I'm constantly trying to keep up with what Siemens is doing in here, which isn't always easy to do. Some of the resources I use to keep up with things are the support center or online documentation provided by Siemens itself. It may not be the easiest to navigate, honestly, but pretty much everything I need to know is being explained somewhere in the documentation. If it turns out it's not being explained, or not being explained well, I have the Siemens community message boards to turn to. This is where an NX expert of some kind has graciously decided to answer questions that are being posted every day. Usually if I go there or simply Google my question, I'll find a link to where the answer is being provided. Of course, other things I or we can do are to attend NX learning events such as EAP or the Early Access Program, and even this event, Realize Live. Another thing I need to keep in mind when trying to be prepared with NX training is to know the audience that I will be communicating with. Some common training methods for delivery include going to the company and leading the training in person. I will say this is probably the best way to train. At least it's the most fun for me. I get to interact closely with the students, see firsthand if the understanding is there. There's also online or remote training, but still instructor-led. Then there's simply just online training, the self-paced kind that can be downloaded or streamed. And I mentioned that we have this available at nxtraining.com. Each type of training opportunity allows for a different kind of preparation. If I'm training in person and either on-site at a company's location or at our place of business, not only does the equipment need to be minded, do I have computers for everyone to use? Will everyone be able to see my screen somewhere in the room? Can everyone connect to NX properly? But I need to be aware of how the structure of the class differs from when I might just be delivering a remote class. On-site will need more introduction time. How will breaks be handled? How will the closing of the training for the day go? These are some of the same types of questions I will need to ask for remote training, but the answers will most likely be a little bit different. Not to mention self-paced training, where considerations need to be made for how an individual will work their way through the content without much guidance. I need to anticipate how they will interact with the content and what kinds of questions they might have, as I won't be right there and available to answer them. This is where creating a confident routine comes in. It is easy to get derailed while trying to train a group of people that may or may not be interested in learning what I'm trying to teach, but having a routine or structure that I'm confident in and can easily return to no matter the tangent is, I found, incredibly important. Understanding how long things generally take to explain or how much time to allow for an activity can be helpful in knowing how much content can actually be included. I always like adding in just a little too much for the allotted time, knowing which ones I'll cut in order to get through everything that I want to make sure to get through before we run out of time. As an example, one of the things I will try to do is to lay out in some detail exactly what I'm planning to cover, and then every so often add in a timestamp next to a specific activity or lesson item so that I can keep track of the classroom's pace compared to what I'm expecting. Having this carefully planned out structure, and granted this works better and is easier to follow when giving a remote training, I won't lose sight of where I am trying to lead the class, and I won't suddenly be out of time when I was hoping to cover many more items of information. That will happen occasionally, and sometimes that is okay. If the tangents you are going on are helpful to what the class is trying to accomplish in its learning, then those are tangents that you want to take. Lastly, be sure to practice. Run through the class content, try a few times to get the timing of things right. Maybe even record yourself so that you can listen to and critique yourself. So now that we feel completely comfortable and confident in our NX training abilities, what are we even talking about? Over the years of training and learning with others in NX, I've found that there are certain aspects of the program, especially in the context of a beginner's or foundational class, that I need to emphasize in order to make everyone's life easier as they learn NX. First of all, the overall NX philosophy of customization. NX wants you to customize the environment and its user interface in order to maximize your time long term. The actions you take inside of NX should be set up in order to be completed in the best and most efficient ways possible. NX allows you to put commands wherever you like, to adjust the style and substance of what you're able to see and interact with. It may seem like a lot, and it is, but if you can get past the state of being overwhelmed, which is a big part of what I'm trying to help with in my training, then you'll see how much power NX is able to give you. Another major aspect to the interactions inside NX CAD is the lean towards object then action as a workflow and way of thinking. Taking the sketch task environment as one major example, there is what's now known as an old environment as well as a new environment, even though the new environment has actually been active for many years now. In the old, you'll find workflows such as picking a dimension tool like linear dimension, and you'll then select a line that you want to add a dimension to. In the new sketch environment, you'll find that the user interface does not present you with access to direct dimensioning tools because they are not needed. NX wants you to interact with the objects that you want to manipulate and then decide based on presented options what to do with that object. You would select a line you've created and dimensional objects will appear that you will then be able to select and make persistent or stick inside the environment. Object then action instead of action then object. Obviously, not every tool in NX is like that, but it does seem like we are moving more and more in that direction. Speaking of the new versus old sketch task environment, here are some other things I've listed as a few of the more important aspects of NX that I like to make sure to emphasize while I'm teaching a class. What are applications? What are task environments? What is selection intent? Synchronous. So we have synchronous technology, we have synchronous modeling. What is realized shape? What are relations compared to constraints? The wave interface, as well as setting up explosions inside our parts for drawing views and other things, and that everything is a part file in NX. I'll be talking about some of these items in a little more detail as we move forward, and then I'll walk through the creation of a simple activity. We have three main areas of customization that I like to focus on in NX training: customer defaults, preferences, and the customized environment. Customer defaults being the defaults for the customer, meaning these are the settings everyone will encounter when they first start up NX. There are tens of thousands of settings that can be messed with. Hopefully, though, you'll find that you don't have to change that many. The settings you do end up changing will be because you find yourself enacting a command or action over and over again. And a simple settings change could automate or streamline that workflow. The effects of that change, the settings change, will take place upon the next startup of NX. Preferences are similar to what's available in customer defaults, but the changes take effect immediately and sit on top of the default settings. Some of these are part-specific settings. Some stay for the current session of NX until you restart, and then it'll look back at that default file. And others, usually those that deal with user interface, will stick from new NX session to new NX session. The customized environment allows for the user to change the placement or location of a command, making the individual workflow inside of NX that much faster and more efficient. It also lets you change the size of the icons and menus you are working with. For example, I'll always bump up the size of my icons, menus, and border bars when I am training, making everything a little more visible on screen. Being able to utilize all these areas will let you set up an environment and user interface for NX exactly the way you want it. I will also emphasize that in order to properly save these kinds of user interface changes, you will want to create your own role. By doing this, you can switch between customized interface setups for different applications or projects. Let's take a quick look at these areas. Jumping into my NX, I am currently in the modeling application and my user interface looks like this. As you may be able to tell, I've already bumped up the size of my icons and toolbars using the customized tool. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. First though, I want to look at the customer defaults. going to File, Utilities, Customer Defaults, this brings up the dialog. In the dialog, there are thousands of settings that I can mess with, all divided into sections similar to that of the applications and task environments that we have within NX. Each section has its own subsection with various tabs and then groupings on those tabs. There's thousands of settings in here. There's one setting that I always like to point out, and that is how to change the direction of your scrolling wheel on the mouse. I can use the search capabilities in the dialog to help me find that setting. So I can click on Find Default, type in Scroll. Here we can look at the columns to help us find the setting that we're specifically looking for. What application does it have to do with? Probably not manufacturing, so it's one of these two gateway application settings. And the gateway application is kind of a initial or startup application. It allows me some additional settings, some access to those settings. If I go over to the setting itself, it'll have a description of what that setting does within that application. In this case, here we have mouse wheel scrolling direction. If I double click on this setting, it will take me directly to that setting area. So here we are in Gateway View Operations. On the View Operations tab, we have mouse wheel scrolling direction. If I want to change that, I can use this pull down, change from forward or backward to zoom in to whatever is comfortable with how I want to orient myself in this 3D environment. Once I do make a change, my OK or apply will become active, and I can hit OK to enact that setting. Now that setting won't take immediate effect. I will have to restart my NX, but every time I start my NX going forward, that will be my default setting. Additionally, we have preferences. Going into preferences, I can change some settings for a limited amount of time. These will sit on top of the defaults until I restart my NX. It will then look at the default file and start me at those base settings once again. These changes go into effect immediately. For example, if I know I will be extruding and creating sheet bodies today, I can go into my modeling preferences. Under General, we have body type. So for example, right now it's set to solid. If I go to my extrude command and I look down at the bottom where I have my settings area, my body type is solid. So in all my tools where I have that kind of an option, I am defaulting to solid. So if I'm extruding something and it happens to be a closed profile, it will become a solid body. Well, let's say, for today, I have to create a bunch of sheet bodies, even if they're closed profiles. So I can go into my File, Preferences, Modeling. Under General, we have that body type, and I can change that to sheet. When I click OK, that effect takes, that setting, takes place immediately. And in Revolve, I have sheet. In Extrude, I have sheet. So even if I have a closed profile, it's going to default to that sheet body type. And then once I restart my NX tomorrow, it will default to that setting in the customer defaults, which is actually the body type for solid going forward. And so it's just kind of a limited time setting, a preference that sits on top of my customer default settings. Looking at the customize environment, we can get there in a few different ways. File pull down all the way at the bottom right, we have customize. Also, as I hover over this, you'll notice in parentheses, I have Control 1 as a hotkey from my keyboard. I can also right click on any command and enter into the customized environment. When I'm in this environment, I can't enact any commands and click on that extrude, click on the hole. Nothing happens. I do have a dialog titled Customize, where I have a Commands tab, Tabs, and Bars tab. This is just kind of a visibility list. shortcuts. This will allow me to change what's on those pop-up shortcuts, the right-click menu, the first-click menu. And then here's that tab where I can change the size of my icons, my tooltips, some of the menus that pop up, the toolbars that I'm working with. And then on the Commands tab, I can search for a command, let's say draft body, and it'll pop up on that match list. I can click, hold, and drag that to anywhere I want to put it. Top border bar, right border bar, up here on my Home tab while I'm in modeling, and then that just becomes a button that is added to my environment. Once I close out of Customize, I'm now back in my modeling environment. I can start my tools once again, that new button that I added, draft body. I can jump into that. If I am making changes like this, adding buttons, changing my environment, I want to make sure that I have my own role created. Over here on the resource bar, I have a roles tab. There's some out-of-the-box content and presentation roles. But if I right-click in an open area, I can create that new user role. I can mess with some of the settings here, change what applications it's in, add a description and an image, but essentially I just want to title this. Once it's titled, I can click OK. I now have a user folder as well in this new role that I have. And the nice thing about having our own role is that I can switch between roles depending on what I'm doing. For example, I can go to one of the out-of-the-box roles, advanced. I can apply that role. It'll give me a warning that, if I have some unsaved changes to my environment, then those will go away, but I did save those to my user role. So now I don't have that button anymore. I'm just kind of out of the box. I go to my user role, Sherpa new, and apply that. I have my draft body button back once again. So having a role that we can save and return to allows my NX to be as efficient and capable as possible for my specific workflow. Another big part of teaching NX is explaining and utilizing the NX Sketch tool. There is, of course, an old version of the Sketch environment, as well as a new version, and I do find myself spending a bit of time on that topic. If we enter into the new Sketch environment, which I do like to use, it is advocating for an object then action way of doing things, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Let's take a look. Back inside NX, I'm going to start a sketch feature and enter into the current sketch task environment. Here we have some tools that are grouped together in a workflow order, from sketch setup to curve creation to editing those curves, and also a group of tools that allow me to include objects from outside the environment to be used within. And lastly, we have the solve group of tools within the newer environment. These tools allow me some capabilities that I've noticed have actually improved my sketch workflow, and I am looking forward to more capabilities in the future. If I take a profile tool, I can quickly sketch something out. Let's go with kind of a polygon there. Once I close that profile, I do get this shaded look. We have a view tab up here in a sketch display area for shaded region to toggle that off. Sketch emphasis, orient to sketch, allowing me to get back to that sketch normal with a click. Once I have some curves laid down, you'll notice that my show movable is toggled on, just meaning I'm asking NX to evaluate whether or not these curves are fully defined, whether I can move them where I want to. And I can just click, hold, and drag on them, drag the endpoints around, just move this stuff wherever I want. You'll notice that I don't have a dimensioning tool on my toolbar, and that's because NX is asking me to interact with the object. So here I just click on a line, interact with the object, decide how long I want that line to be. Do that again. Maybe I'll define it with this length, this horizontal dimension. Do the same thing over here. Make that 5 perhaps. And you'll notice as I'm interacting with those dimensions, they become this black persistent dimension. And go with one more here. Like that. And it'll probably take me a while to say fully define this, so I'll just use a line over here for that example where I have this line, I click on it, I decide I want it to be a certain length, say 4, and then I want to define the position of this relative to my sketch environment. So I can say this point to there is 10. And let's say that same point down here, let's go 3. It might be a little hard to see some of these numbers on my screen. But then I also want to define this endpoint here. And once I define this endpoint, let's say 1, you'll notice that instead of this brown movable color, I can move this thing around wherever I want. It's this black color, and I can click, hold, and drag on it, and it doesn't go anywhere. It has these persistent dimensions that keep it fixed in space within the environment. And so this line, being black, is the fully defined object color. Now let's say I do want to make a design change. This line isn't exactly where I want it to be. Maybe it's not the exact length either. I can click on this Relax Dimensions, and then I can place that line wherever I want. If I hold the line itself, it's just moving the location of the line. If I hover over the endpoint and I start dragging the endpoint, now I'm positioning that endpoint specifically. It's on changing the length, changing the position of that endpoint, just dragging it around. Once I get it to its exact position, I can unrelax those dimensions, and now I can no longer drag that object around. And I am once again fully defined with this sketch object. In more recent versions of NX, we do have the capability of working with both the old and new style of sketch features within the same file. There's also a set of tools that are specific to NX CAD, the Synchronous Modeling commands. I am a big fan of using these in my everyday modeling practices, and will make sure to spend a chunk of time going through what they can do for you. These tools will allow you to directly edit geometry that has either been imported or created with minimal restrictions. You'll be able to redesign any part in minutes, as well as make fast edits while not really knowing the history of the part. If it's an imported body, the part won't even have a feature history tree, but I can just move forward with the design using this set of tools. I'm currently in my modeling application within my NX environment, and I have this block open. It's got some different features on it, and I'm going to take a look at using a few of my synchronous modeling tools. It's a tool set up on the Home tab when I'm in modeling, and it's one of my all-time favorite groups of tool sets in all of CAD. And I've used a lot of various CAD packages like Creo and SolidWorks and CATIA, and the synchronous modeling tools in NX are by far my favorite. These tools allow me to just directly edit on top of whatever is in front of me, whether it's imported or even if it does have a feature tree. For example, if I take this little conical boss here, and I simply just want to move it. Let's say I have to figure out, okay, where's the dimension that drives the location of this boss? And so maybe there's a sketch in here with a revolve, and I'm kind of looking through my feature tree and then going back up, to make that the current feature, and then I'm adding a value and hoping it moves where I want without affecting much else. Or maybe it's imported and I have no features to even try and work with at that point. What I can do is, with my synchronous modeling tools, for example, move face is one of the more commonly used ones. I can simply grab this tool box select the group of faces that I want to use, just making sure I didn't grab anything on the back side there. And then reorienting this drag handle that I have available. It's a distance and angle drag handle. I can simply just move this over to the side. I can do so with a specific dimension in mind, let's say 4 inches. Click OK, and I've moved it where I want. Simple as that. I do have a move face command that I can return to, so it's not featureless. You know, it's just features like anything else within the modeling environment, but I get to do pretty much whatever I want. For example, maybe I don't want this here at all, but I'm afraid to try and delete something, or like I said, you know, I have an imported geometry and I don't have anything to, you know, any features to delete. I can just use this delete face, making sure that under settings I have heal on, which will allow the geometry around the deleted face to heal itself to adapt to the change. And then I can just grab these faces that I want to get rid of and delete it. Looks like I grabbed the back face of the part here, so I'll deselect that. But that entire thing goes away and it's now just a block in that area. One last one I'll take a quick look at is resize blend. Let's say these blends are not the right size, but this is imported geometry. I can't simply just click on this and change the value. Maybe I don't have anything there, or maybe I change it and a bunch of stuff fails because it's so far up the feature tree that it's really touching a lot of other things. I can just use this resize blend. Say I want to take this 1/4 inch blend and I want to make that 1/2 inch instead. Just enter that in there. It changes the size of my blend. It really is that easy, and I have a history that I can return to and edit when necessary. So we have synchronous modeling, something that I really enjoy as a part of NX. Moving into another area that definitely needs to be included in any basic training for NX CAD is how to deal with assemblies. Aspects of assemblies in NX that need to be focused on are the assembly load options, reference sets and arrangements, and what they can do for you, utilizing the environment for a bottom-up assembly design compared to top-down and what that looks like, as well as wave interpart linking and why that is so important to the design space. Here I am in my no part environment, just meaning that I don't have a part open. I'm not in an application necessarily, but I'm going to open up an assembly. Before I do that, though, I want to look at one of my assembly tools, the assembly load options. Assembly load options allow me to tell NX how I want to deal with any kind of assembly, how I want it to load, you know, where I want NX to look, all that stuff. And so I can set it up specifically to deal with the kind of assembly that I'm working with. Especially if it's a large assembly, I want to open it up as efficiently and quickly as possible. In this case, I'm going to set up my load scope from all components to structure only. And in this case, structure only is allowing me to open the file that contains components, the assembly file, and it's not going to load up or open any of the components themselves. So it's going to open up as kind of an empty assembly. But it opens really quickly and I can get to wherever I want within my assembly and open up the components that I care about specifically this way. So I'm going to set that. I'm going to actually change this to partially load. So this is just controlling how much of each component gets loaded. Click OK, so I now have my assembly load options set. I'm going to open up an assembly. This is a backhoe assembly that I use for training. And it opens up and I don't have anything in here. I double click in the background to fit whatever it is I want to look at, but I don't have anything. On my assembly navigator, that's this tab here, I can see my bold, active, loaded assembly file, but I don't have any components. These are all unloaded. Now let's say I want to do this because there's a specific component that I need to work on. Let's call that the boom. I can check that specific one on and it gets loaded. Now I can see that component and only that component, because that's the only one that I have loaded, I can start working with it within the context of the assembly. Let's say I want to open up components that are nearby, but not all the components of my assembly. I can right click on the component that I have loaded, and I have an option to open other components via proximity. So I'll do that here. We have a bounding box, a range. Anything touching this box will get loaded. I can kind of see the preview of what's going to get loaded. Maybe that's a little too much, so I shrink that down a little bit. Check on preview, although this boom component probably touches a lot, but doesn't touch everything. So I can kind of see what's in there. If I click OK, it'll load those components that are nearby. If I want the entire assembly loaded, I can right click on that upper level assembly, go to open, and then either child components or assembly. Child components will load just the child, the next level components, and if there are sub-assemblies, it won't load any of those components. If I do the entire assembly, everything will get loaded. So now that I have my assembly open, one thing I want to point out with assemblies is that I have access to all my modeling tools. There isn't really an assemblies application. What makes a file an assembly simply is just if I've added a component to the file, it becomes an assembly file. My assembly tools are always available up here on my assemblies tab. And I can start assembling other components. I can start constraining my components or moving my components. I have plenty of other options to do things within my assembly. One thing I'm going to take a look at though is my interpart links. So I have this wave geometry linker. This will allow me to share data between files and allow me to design around that object that I'm linking into the other component. So for example, if I create a brand new component because I want to put something that sits right on the edge of this cab of my assembly, I can create a brand new component. It'll get dropped in on the bottom of this component tree. Let's call that model 1. So here we have model 1. If I right click on here at the very top, I can make this the work part. And I do want to do that in order to drop in that linked object into the component file itself. So now I'm working within that component file, but I'm in the context of my upper level assembly. So I'm going to click on Wave Geometry Linker. Here I have a lot of different options for objects that I can link between components. In this case, let's take some faces. Maybe we go a couple of these faces right there. Click OK. I can see that there is some emphasized geometry there along with the faded components, the de-emphasized components. If I right click on this brand new component that I've created, this part, and I open it in its own window, I have as my first feature on the part navigator a linked face. This linked face was brought in with Wave Geometry Linker, and I can now design around it. For example, I can go to my Home tab where I have Extrude, and I can create something that sits right on top. Let's go simple. Now I don't want to subtract here. I want to just create a block that I will then trim. So let's kind of go in both directions. So I'm going to use this sheet to trim away at that block. So I'm going to create that geometry. And then in order to trim this, I do need to fill in this gap here. We have a pretty nice tool that I will now search for called Delete Edge. Here we have Delete Edge, and using tangent edges in my selection intent, I can delete that edge. Now I can use that as a trim sheet. So I can modify those geometries that I'm linking in. They don't have to, remain the same. If I double click on this as if to edit it, it is pulling that information. Under parent information, it's telling me where it's getting it, what object or feature it's pulling it from, whether it's up to date or not. And then I can use trim body to trim that away. Now I'll go back to my assembly. So I'll switch windows here and I'll make the assembly the active work part. If I highlight that model, I am seeing the sheet as well as the object that's the actual model. And so I do need to fix that in the display. So the reference set right now is set to model, but it's including objects that I don't want it to be a part of that model reference set. The reference sets display control the display state. I'm going to go back to my model. I'm going to go to my assemblies tab and we have reference sets under context. If I highlight model, I can see via highlight what is in that reference set. And if I hold down shift on my keyboard, I can deselect that trimming sheet, that reference object, and then close out of that. If I go back to my assembly, it's no longer a part of that model representation for my component. So just a really quick look at the assembly environment along with some aspects of that wave geometry linker. The activity is one of the most important tools we have as trainers to convey the usefulness and meaning of the tools inside of NX. When creating an activity, there are certain things I like to keep in mind. What is the main idea I'm trying to get across? Which tool is being used? How does this activity fit in with the larger NX workflow of the lesson plan? What else can be added to this activity that will unlock more aspects of NX for the user? With all those things in mind, let's take a look at an example. I'm designing an activity that is to bridge the gap from learning and using datum feature tools at the beginning of what is a feature modeling section into the commands for basic feature modeling, like extrude, revolve, the whole tool. So I want to encompass as much as I can into an efficient activity. What commands or tools are we planning to use? We just went over the datum feature tools, as I mentioned, so let's utilize those to help us do something else with a general modeling tool such as extrude. We will also be creating a sketch, whether it be the first thing we create or embedded inside the extrude tool itself. I want to use the datum feature tools to show that setting up certain features can allow for some quick and easy model edits downstream. One thing I like to add to an early modeling activity is to note the edit object display capability, so we'll add that in as well. The main reason the datum features are being added is to control the hole that we're putting on top of our main body. Knowing all of this, I will use PowerPoint or a similar program to design training slides that explain what we're trying to do. Here's a quick layout of the informational slide that will go with the activity we've just designed. I usually won't put too much of the exact step-by-step process, as these activities are generally instructor-led and not necessarily self-driven. I'll keep adding activities and investigations like this to the lesson, hopefully in a workflow that is comfortable and allows me to properly train someone in all the important aspects of NX CAD. And with that, thank you for your time. My name is Devin Croswell. I am a senior design engineer, NX trainer, and specialist. And if you have any questions, feel free to message me on LinkedIn or email me at dcroswell@sherpa-design.com. Thanks again.